Thanks everyone for joining us at the Project Censored radio show. We're very glad to welcome to the show Zara Zimbardo, who's an interdisciplinary studies faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies, director of the Equity and Justice Consulting Organization Partners for Collaborative Change, a writer and researcher, and a longtime body worker. Marsification is her first album, co-created with sound artist and therapist Lily Sloan. Zara, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I really, I mean, the album starts with suggesting that you find a quiet space and just kind of let the album flow over you and across you and through you. And that is definitely some advice that I can pass on to others who might listen to this. This is not something you listen to while making breakfast. And what I see as a core concept of this album is the goal or the action of turning Mars into Earth and turning Earth into Mars. And the idea that this lust for other worlds comes from a conscious or subconscious knowing that our own world is sick, and that we are the ones responsible for that illness. Likewise, knowing too that some of us have the privilege and the access to avoid entirely or mostly the pain and suffering already coming to us via human-made climate chaos. Could you talk a little bit about how you came to consider Mars and our relationship to it, both as galactic dream and nefarious plan, as a study not only of our systems of oppression, but also of our unique and beautiful ecosystems here on Earth?
Mm, wow, what a question. Yes, absolutely. There's so much to say there, but just to linger with what you said about turning this drive to turn Mars into Earth, right, to terraform it, to make it potentially habitable for humans, has been the long time province of science fiction, right? And we're at this remarkable time right now in the history of our planet where longtime sci-fi dreams and fantasies are become science nonfiction. And this is happening right at a time of these dreams and astro-colonial fantasies seeming viable, desirable, and fundable because we are turning our amazing, miraculous, astounding, biodiverse Earth into Mars, right? So this incredibly poignant, to say the least, time that we're at, where there is this massive momentum coming from all kinds of places and people, including tech billionaires or billionauts, right, to make Mars habitable while the Earth is being rendered increasingly uninhabitable. And so this merits, not just critical thinking as we're seeing space colonization taking place in real time, but critical feeling. And this album is an offering of critical feeling, which is like, this is an extended meditation to really be with and question and explore and feel into some of the nightmares that fuel astro-colonial dreams, right? And for so long, a slogan of the environmental movement has been there's no planet B, right? Which forces us to confront, like, what is the system change that we can do here now? And so what does it do to say there is a planet B and there is this backup planet, right? What does that do to our imagination? What does that do to our momentum to make radical transformative changes that will ensure a just and or at least livable future? And so the title of the album is Marsification, which is also a neologism, which we'll get into, right? And the subtitle is A Tale of Planetary Grief. And so this is really in a way, like as an antidote to the ways that our collective eco-anxiety is being hijacked and channeled by powerful interests into just like techno-fix solutions, of which Mars is the most outlandish and expensive and absurd, as an escape hatch from inescapable problems on our home planet. We're inviting feeling into grief at this time that of ecocide, of omnicide on our home planet, which makes this dream of a civilizational reboot on another planet seem like a good option for some.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned neologisms, and I wanted to dig into that because as a word nerd myself, I find it fascinating how often it is that language shapes the way that we think rather than the other way around.
Absolutely.
And that our language is often so devoid of so many situations and emotions. And there's actually a book that talks about this, how various languages have words for things that we don't have in English. And I I have that feeling sometimes myself as a native Swedish speaker, and something that I've heard from friends who speak Arabic or Mandarin or Spanish or what have you. And so something that y'all do in Marsification that I really appreciate is that you incorporate and you highlight the concept of neologisms, literally just meaning new word. Um, and in talking about Marsification, which is in and of itself a neologism, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about Marsification as a neologism and how this word goes beyond the merely physical act of colonizing space.
Yeah, for sure. So this concept album, right, which is an audio artwork, has an art project within the art project, right? So throughout, like you said, there are different neologisms, most of which are from a participatory public art project called the Bureau of Linguistical Reality, who are completely aligned with what you just said, that language shapes our worldview and lenses and how we think, and that they came about a decade ago, convening salons of different people around the world to say, like, we need new language related to psycho-emotional, spiritual, ecological states associated with climate change and environmental upheaval and destruction. And so people get together and they're like, here's a definition, here's something we need to name, which is perhaps new, and we need to be able to talk about it, and then coming up with these terms. Right, and there's a long history of this, right? Like in the early 20th century, where there was coal exhaust, for the first time in the sky, et cetera, right? And different emissions. And there was something in the sky that was not only smoke and not just fog. And so they needed to create the term, right, the portmanteau smog. And so throughout the album, there's 5 words that we bring forward. Terraforming, which dovetails very neatly with Marsification, which is the inexorable realization that not only are we incapable of fixing and fleeing to other planets, but we can't even slow the death of our own. Shadow time, which invites us to feel into this kind of creeping, haunted sense of 2 different timescales as we go about our goal-oriented day-to-day lives, and then may feel that a species that has existed for millions of years is going extinct in our child's lifetime, or that something may happen that will just make all of this irrelevant or obsolete. One term that is not from the Bureau of Linguistical Reality, but was created that was created by Glenn Albrecht, an Australian environmental philosopher, is solastalgia, and this was created in the early 2000s. Right, so similar to nostalgia, which is a sense of, right, longing or homesickness, and solastalgia is homesickness while you're still at home, and your home is being irreversibly altered or damaged or transformed in ways that you may feel helpless to change. And so it was like, what was happening in mining communities in Australia and other places. It was like, this is an emotion, this is a psychological state that needs to be named and needs to be engaged with. And so that's the spirit of having throughout, in a robotic Joanne fembot voice, different definitions. And Marsification, I coined with Patrick Rainsborough and with the Bureau some years ago. And so this term, right, which is talking about techno-utopian fantasy to transcend our ecological and dire physical realities on Earth, or this expansion of colonial fantasy beyond the atmosphere and manifest destiny to the stars, right, was really meant to, we wanted to introduce this term to both name, acknowledge, and also in some ways mock this idea of billionaire techno-fix solutions that are distracting us from the needs to work within ecological limits to drive system change here on Earth. And that it is the same logic that drives ecocide on Earth, of this like rapacious, insatiable, extractive, exploitive, nature's ours to exploit, um, right, ideology, which has caused so much damage and haunting for so long. And so the album, right, is a way to really, again, drop into feeling this moment that we're at instead of just analyzing and talking about it. Yeah, this feels important to name, right? And we're here in 2024. 2030 is being, for some time, has been hyped up as this big decade where there will be boots on the ground in Mars and the first humans, researchers on Mars, and laying the grounds perhaps for some type of settlement or city, right? And so this is very immediate and is really important to question, what is this doing to our imagination, right? What is it opening up of all these like, oh, exciting frontiers, out to infinity, etc. And what is it shutting down in terms of us being able to imagine overcoming, right, or the work that we would need to do to confront our past and present, right, and future on Earth.
Yeah, and I wanna get to some of that that you just mentioned in a minute, but I also want to kind of circle back, as you mentioned, manifest destiny, and of course making this connection that that's not just something that is in history books, as James Baldwin said, that his history is not past. And Marsification, like the idea that there would be no victims, right? But the colonizers that then created the United States said the same thing, right? Either that the indigenous would die and then that would free them of their savagery, or they'd assimilate and the same outcome would be true. So I'm curious, like with that, like what are we ruining by this quest? Assuming that there aren't actual Martians, what is that colonialist mindset that values, exploration and expansion above all else? What is that manifest destiny putting at risk?
Yeah, this is a huge question that is really important to keep asking. And my co-creator for this album, Lily Sloan, the seed for all of this was planted in 2019 when I was on her radio show called Radical Advice, and we were talking about the psychology of space colonization. And we really got animated by talking about this idea of manifest destiny, right, which was this ideology of Western expansion and progress, right? It's an elite ideology that this was divinely ordained and inevitable and was justification for genocide, for violent displacement and dispossession. And so we really landed on this idea of manifest destiny as like an obsessive compulsive condition, right? That we have not grown out of, right? That keeps casting its spell. And right, there's many voices at this time saying like, we cannot colonize Mars until we learn some lessons here on Earth, right? And the lessons are many. And just to say, it's not like we are painting everything with one brush, saying like, oh, exploration is somehow inherently bad. Not at all. But what this particular offering and intervention is being like, what are some of these inherited worldviews that we need to hospice, right? Like wherever we go, right? We go away. When we arrive at away, what are we going to find? We're going to find ourselves with our baggage, right? And are bringing all of our stuff with us. And so what work needs to happen to compost and really reckon with some of this, so to clear some space for something new. And so when you're asking about right, some of these continuities, right, there's one track on the album called Brought to You By, which is this very, right, kind of tongue-in-cheek space tourism and like be a pioneer ad, which is making very direct links, right, with these continuities, right, of economically, right, different institutions, different drivers, and that there's a lot of arguments for the colonization of Mars that can be understood as reactions against any kind of historical accountability, right? So even if there are no indigenous Martians, perhaps there are microbes, right? There's so many questions to ask, right? For whom would this kind of multi-planetary existence be formed, right? Who would do the labor? Would there be extraction of different resources from our home planet? Who would do, right, heavy and dangerous work? What would be the impacts of that extraction on Earth? What types of hierarchies would there be? What types of law and governance, right? And so again, there's this, can be these fantasies by someone like, right, one of the most influential and visible Occupy Mars, right, proponents, Elon Musk, right, but saying things like, oh, we'll have direct democracy on Mars, right? And so that's an example of like Marsifying our failing democracy by being like, oh, we'll just be able to reboot on an alien planet. And so all of this is very old, right? It's like dazzling new technology, but very old patterns of colonizers, right, believing that somehow they are going to be unburdened from the past and to be able to start life anew, right, with this dream of empty lands and all of the dehumanizing justifications to portray land as empty. Right, and that's very much alive and thick in the air right now, right? There are a lot of like pretty uncritical, unself-conscious rhetoric and discourses, right, coming from different places of Wild West frontiers, of praising Christopher Columbus, of talking about New World exploration, and this is now our next, adventure awaits as we voyage across the cosmic ocean, etc. Right, and so you have a lot of other decolonial thinkers and activists or people who are doing amazing work around, more just space policy, who are like, right? There's all kinds of issues of ethics that we would do all this damage here, right? We is a very particular we, right? Somehow discard or transcend our planet and these limits without having learned from any of these mistakes, right? And so there's both this, gigantic possibility that somehow that this could summon radical imagination to become something different, right? Which is a long-standing trope, right, of visionary fiction. And at the same time, you're seeing these very dominant colonial mentalities continuing on, right? That continued forms of amnesia and erasure. Yeah, and so that danger comes back to Earth. And just to say, right, that in all of this, it makes us miss the opportunity to use our ecological limits to really drive systems change on Earth, right? So that's a very potent juxtaposition of thinking about of how we just think about limits. And the ways that the supposed limitlessness of space is summoned as what will save us from ourselves or help us transcend ourselves.
Yeah, and I mean, there's so many threads to pull on here. But I, first of all, I love the word billionaut, and I had not heard that before.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of billionauts destroying so much, just like the colonizers destroyed so much. I think for me, one of the things that it feels that they're destroying is this ancestral, this ancient connection to space.
Mm.
And there's this wonderful meme that I've seen going around, which is you're made of stardust, but so is trash, so don't take yourself too seriously. And I love that because it's not only is it true, but it also comments on like, hey, maybe we should make less trash. But
Now
in
we're
the
raining down space trash as well, but yeah.
yes, which I mean, soon we might not even be able to shoot up rockets because they might just hit the colossal amounts of space trash, rushing around our planet.
A big hindrance for commercial space flights. Yeah.
In the album, you talk about how our bodies are oceans and that we are home to millions of other organisms. Quote, my body is made of other bodies, always in strange company. And I love that, especially with this talk of the connection to space. I think there is a lot of like this othering, like, oh my gosh, this is this other frontier, this is this other, but we have a very strong ancestral and ancient connection to space. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, a connection that's both physical and mental, and how that is also being destroyed or twisted and deformed by this talk of like colonizing Mars.
Hmm. That is a beautiful question. Yeah, and just to say, obviously, we're focusing on Mars, right? But there's also this colonial talk of the supposed $1 trillion gold rush, of asteroid mining in the asteroid belt, right? And just the fact that it's talked about as that way, right, just shows that we're right remain under that kind of spell. Yeah, I mean, there are so many different sky traditions, right, in different cultures, right, throughout space and time. And it's so important, as you said, right, that there's this diversity that can be present and lifted up instead of getting twisted and dominated by this the vision with the most funding behind it. Aparna Venkatasan, who's a works in space policy, and is a cosmologist, writes and talks beautifully about space as ancestral global commons, right? And can we talk not about colonies, but about communities, right? That it's not saying, oh, don't go, but how do we go? What questions do we ask? What principles are guiding this connection? And to acknowledge that we are in space, right? We are in outer space. We are made of, right, obviously, stardust. I saw an image the other day which showed our spiral galaxy and just a little like, you are here living in fear and paying taxes, right? And so we've often like looked to the skies, right, to get this expansive sense of awe and wonder, to feel our smallness, right, with humility in the face of this. And something that fascinates me and us are the ways that going to space, people who have actually done that, or going there just in our imaginations or a VR headset or whatever, that the perspective of the earth, right, how transformative that can be. There's this phenomenon called the overview effect, which has happened for a number of astronauts, right? Different for each person, but with all of this drive to get off of the planet, right? And to make it out there, and then not expecting the impact that it would have to turn around and look out the window and look back home and to see the Earth from the perspective of space, right? And so, which can bring up all kinds of awe, transcendent feelings, as well as tremendous sorrow, concern, right? Seeing this fragile blue miracle that we're on, right? A sense of different kinds of solidarity. William Shatner, Captain Kirk, experienced this on Blue Origin with Jeff Bezos, with this highly televised trip into space, and where he, had remarkable comments afterwards, saying my trip to space was supposed to feel like a celebration. Instead, it felt like a funeral, and was the strongest feelings of grief I've ever encountered. To have that perspective and to feel the loneliness of space and to just be in awe of all of the life forms on Earth that have taken millions of years to evolve. And, we are on this ecocidal collision course with the life support systems of the planet, right? And just crossing our ecological tipping points and thresholds. Right? And so in terms of perspectives from space, I'm really curious how we can all have the overview effect without actually leaving the planet, right? And that can help us to dissolve another part of the colonial mindset, right? Which is of separation, right? And separation and domination. There is a Thich Nhat Hanh, who's a Zen Buddhist monk, would often lead walking meditations, having people close their eyes and imagine that they were on the moon, right? Where there's no birds, no grass, no clouds, and that you're looking at the earth rise and just feeling yourself fill up with longing to be able to take peaceful steps on our blue-green planet, right? So he's like leading you through this, and then you open your eyes and you're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe we're here, right? And so he's sharing this, the Zen miracle of walking on earth, that the true miracle isn't walking on air or water, but is actually walking on earth and knowing that you are, right? And so space, right, and imagining being, quote, out there or being on, right, sibling planet of Mars, how can that be an ally to help us keep landing on Earth in different ways, and to wake up in a not dissimilar way that near-death experiences, right? It's very well cataloged that people are then awash with wonder and gratitude for life, you know, to do all of the brave and bold things that they didn't do, to let people know that they love and appreciate them, to live life more creatively, etc. And you don't need to have, you can meditate on death. You don't need to have a near-death experience, and you don't need to have a near-planet experience, right, to keep coming home and wonder. And the track that you described, My Body Is of Earth, is meant to have us really feel that we are not on this planet, we're of this planet. We're not just, we're walking around here, we could be walking around somewhere else. Like, we are this planet walking around on itself, and to not just cognitively know, but to actually feel what we're made of. Everything that we're made of is like this gravitational field, this atmosphere, these elements on this water planet. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully put. And you inadvertently answered my last question as well. So in wrapping up here, I wanted to ask you about nostalgia and longing, because this is something that's also covered. I mean, the solastalgia is, of course, a different kind, but just the promise of space that we grew up, or that I grew up hearing, which I can contrast very well with. In Sweden, no one talked about going to space. That's just not. They were like, that's not what we do. But in the US, it was very much like, this is something that we're going to do, and you could go to space. And how it also speaks of Earth as being tapped out, as a place that's already explored, and by these people that we're taught to admire, whether that be Columbus or Cortez or American presidents. And so the quest for space is seen as a way to like kind of save America,
Right.
Pay attention to the night sky, where we'll shoot you up to this barren wasteland that'll somehow flourish and make sense, like trickle down economics, in spite of all evidence to the contrary. Don't pay attention to what's happening here and now. Don't ground yourself in this space and time that you exist, but rather in that good old promise of outer space as a haven, this literal and figurative escape. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, wrapping up here, about what Mars and Marsification says about our psyche, specifically with regards to this kind of deep longing and nostalgia to a promise that we've never actually lived, as we live through so much oppression and climate chaos.
Your questions are phenomenal.
Oh, well, thank you. Your album is phenomenal. So
just appreciating, how each of them could be, go into much longer conversations. Yeah, and so nostalgia is powerful to acknowledge how it has been wielded and who wields it and what are the effects on us. Again, at this time that is pretty desperate and is giving rise to desperate fantasies, right? Like, our terrestrial ecosystem is making it very clear that business as usual, right, and the colonial capitalist way of doing things has pushed us to the brink of extinction, right? And we can debate the massive feat of terraforming, right, of bending Mars to become habitable for humans and perhaps other life forms, right? However, the dominant system only has a proven track record of unintentionally making this planet inhospitable to humans, right? And more than human species. Right. And so part of this offering is just to help us keep breaking the spell when we're hearing it, because especially with that anxiety and being like, okay, yeah, save us, yes, do the geoengineering, what will it be? Right. But these deep longings are so important not to bypass, and techno-fix solutions both hijack them, capitalize on them, and they also bypass them, where it's like, what is going on with that longing, and how can we get curious about this longing to save ourselves and what that would take, right? And what is it about the red planet that would make it possible there, and if it's not possible here, right? And within this are these promises that come, right, in popular discourse, that while life support, like keeping us alive on Mars, would be outrageously technologically difficult, that it would be in some other ways a simpler time, and a simpler love, and a simpler relationship. And it's like, oh, leave this old relationship with Earth that has so much baggage and is so difficult, is going nowhere, for this new exciting relationship full of possibility, right, with the god of war, right, over here, etc. There was maybe water billions of years ago, um, and just to say that this is a trope that has existed for quite a few decades of transcendence, right? That we would be able to transcend our bodies, right? And upload our consciousness, perhaps transcend mortality, transcend this planet, transcend ways that we can't imagine other way out of. And then that would be possible in this radical new land. And so again, it's like, yeah, let's go in visionary fiction. Let's go in VR headsets. There's the Mars Desert Research Station in Utah. Maybe they could expand their scope, right? Of just like having people go there and working on ethical issues, and practicing radically different ways of being, that we could hope could sprout on this different surface, right? But to suppose that some of our deepest issues that have haunted the human family so long could be solved or overcome anywhere other than Earth is an escapist fantasy. And just as you said, can function as a massive distraction at a time when we need to be channeling like extraordinary powers of collaboration, and imagination around ecological, right, paths forward that are just and that are livable. And there's a there's a fabulous book that just came out called A City on Mars, written by a wife and husband research team, who are brilliant and hilarious. Kelly and Zach Weinersmith, and the subtitle is Can We Settle Space? Should We Settle Space? And Have We Really Thought This Through? And I bring it up because it's making a big buzz right now, where they are space geeks, right, and deep ties with space settlement community, and thought they were going to do this massive research and write this book that was like, all right, we're figuring stuff out, let's do this. And the whole book is like, whoa, let's put on the brakes, right? They're looking at space sex and space reproduction, dying on Mars, right? Governance and law, all kinds of issues, like incredible unknowns about, medical unknowns. Right. And they're ending with saying, like, this certainly can't happen at the pace of venture capital. Right. It has to happen at some very different pace, if at all, but saying, right, that going to the stars will not make us wise. Like, we need to become wise, if we want to go to the stars. And so that speaks to some of these issues of longing and nostalgia, of what conditions do we need to create to work with that in the practice fields here on our planet, and not assume that this astoundingly resource intensive way of going all the way to Mars is going to magically liberate us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. We need to be wise first. Zara, thank you so much for, well, not just for sitting down with us, but for co-creating this album. It is beautiful and powerful and necessary. Where is the best way for folks to interact with it?
Yeah, I would invite everyone to come to our website, marsification.com. And so there we'll have links to where it's streaming on different platforms. And then it also gives some different context. There's a whole bunch of resources to get into if folks are interested, as well as links to the different neologisms that are used. But that's the best way. And it has the delightful feature of navigating, moving around a planet while you're interacting with the website.
Yeah, it's a fun website. So thank you again, Zara, so much for taking
Thank
the time
you.
to sit down with us and to co-create this album.
A huge pleasure.